Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Jack will be on in just a second. We will be doing our webinar series tonight about brain breaks.
Glad we're all together here. Danielle, take it away. Anybody have any questions during the webinar? Please feel free to type them in the questions. Check just in case any polls come out. If they do, if you could answer them. As the questions are asked, I will relay them over to Danielle at an appropriate time. Thanks everyone for joining.
Great. So today we're going to be talking about how to incorporate brain breaks using Snowflake software or Snow.live in your classroom setting. So I thought the best way to show this would be doing a quick little Snowflake lesson activity to talk a little bit about what a brain break is and what it looks like in a classroom. So there's definitely a lot of neuroscience that goes into the study of brain breaks and how they help with learning, help with attention, really just a great model for students in the class. And since I am not a neuroscientist, I definitely needed some little notes to help me remember as I go through and just explain a little bit of it. So basically, brain breaks are designed based off of the way in which students and everyone learns. And how we learn are through sensory receptor signals that are sent to the memory storage regions of the brain. So your sensory receptor signals are things like what you see, what you hear, what you've read, things that you're experiencing, so that kind of part of learning. And then they move along into a pathway through the brain to be stored in the area that makes memories. What a lot of students struggle with during their day with school is in a traditional classroom setting, if they're expected to give all of their focus for the entire class period, their brains become a little bit overwhelmed and those pathways become blocked. So then all of that information that they had been getting in class, it doesn't get stored into their memory. So what brain breaks are intentional learning shifts that allow the networks of the brain to re-energize. So the best way that I can compare this to is kind of thinking of it like driving a car down a highway. So when your brain gets stressed or when it's overloaded, it's like having too much traffic on the highway and your car or information can't get to its destination. Brain breaks provide that opportunity to allow your brain a chance to re-energize, to get it refreshed and revitalized. So then the flow of traffic or the flow of information is able to reach its destination. And that's all based off of a lot of neuroscience. I know in my classroom, whenever we incorporated brain breaks, it was something that I did that just worked before I really understood all of the science behind it. But the most basic way I can explain the science, the way that we make memories, the way the information comes, it comes from the amygdala and it's filtered through into, it reaches the prefrontal cortex. So for students learning, when their brains become stressed, they're unable to sustain memory. When we say stressed, it's not necessarily stress from anxiety or from worried. It's sometimes stress just by the amount of information. It's when the amygdala becomes kind of at capacity and nothing new can pass through it. So it's kind of completely absorbed all that it can and no new information is able to flow through it. They've just kind of they're maxed out. So what brain breaks focus on, it focuses on restoring neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters being those chemicals that carry the messages between nerve cells. So in our brains, we have a very finite amount of neurotransmitters in different regions, and they become depleted when there's sustained concentrated study. So when students are doing tasks like writing notes, or if they're doing practice drills, or if they're engaged in active listening, it's causing their neurotransmitters to kind of like run out. And what brain breaks do is they transfer brain networks to allow recovery in worked areas. So the section of a student's brain that had been focused on taking their notes or doing their math problems, where they had put in all of that energy and all of that attention, when you incorporate a brain break, it gives that piece of the brain a chance to recover, to rejuvenate, and it's shifting the focus to a different part of the brain. So it's kind of like giving it a break, giving it a rest, and letting a different part do something different. So with brain breaks in the class, with this switch for different mental activity, the way that it's best used in a classroom is before the brain is stressed. So with most students, a lot of the studies are showing that students are not engaged, that they're distracted about a quarter of the time during instruction. So they're unable to focus, they're unable to retain that new information. And that usually happens for elementary students when direct instruction or that sustained concentrated study goes on for more than 10 to 15 minutes. For older kids, it's usually 20 to 30 minutes. That's when their brain kind of maxes out. That's when they've been as full as they can get, and they're no longer going to be able to retain any new information. So incorporating brain breaks, so the how to do it, doesn't necessarily have to disrupt a lot of the flow of learning. In my classroom, we would do brain breaks for no more than 3 minutes. We would typically have one, if not two, during a transition that were really just short ways for students to give their brains a chance to refocus. And we did that in two different ways. So we did these mood boosting activities, things that would increase dopamine in the brain. So things that would made it seem like we were being a little silly, but by laughing and having that little moment of silliness in the class, that's increasing dopamine. And that's going to be good for those neurotransmitters that are trying to re-energize and make those connections again so that students can continue learning new information. We also did a lot of physical activity, and I'll show you some examples of those brain break activities in a moment, where students were able to get their blood flowing a little bit, kind of pumping through that oxygen. And obviously our brains need good oxygen and good blood flow in order to be refreshed. This was also really good in our class because my students learned to expect having brain breaks in our classroom. And this tied into like the idea of mindfulness and mindset. So whenever I was designing my instruction for the day, whatever it is we were doing, I always made sure that I included in that, and I included in the agenda that I shared with my students at the start of each class when our brain break was going to occur. So if our agenda read, first we're going to take notes, and then we're going to do this practice exercise, and then we'll have our brain break, and then we're going to go into a partner activity. So my students could anticipate when we were going to have our brain break. And they knew that, okay, I have to get through this task. So for the next 15 minutes, I would have all of their attention focused on the task at hand. And my students understood that even though it might be challenging, that they would have a chance to not forget about it, but a chance to switch their focus once that challenging part of the task was over and they had their brain break, and then we could move forward in our instruction. And they were all really, really short. My students knew when they were coming. We did a lot of snowflake activities as part of our brain breaks. And it was a really great way to just help my kiddos get their attention refocused and continue learning the content that we were learning. So it also gave them a time to make those connections and start processing. So even though they weren't, doing, active learning and doing a physical task, their brains were still building those connections. They were still processing everything that they had been learning. So some of the different snowflake activities that we've done, and these are all in the community. So you can search simply brain breaks, and all of these lessons will pop up. We did one lesson activity, and this is a cards lesson activity. And I did include a little bit of rules for how to play this, so setting it up in one zone on your board and using the timer to complete a select number of activities during that allotted time. So if I had a 2.5 minute timer, as we can see here, I might tell my students, okay, we're going to do X amount of activities for 30 seconds each. And then my students would flip over the cards and they would have different tasks. And I like to use a lot of the tic-tac-toe models, so any three, but they had to be somehow connected. So we can see run in place, balance on your right foot, jump and spin, nod side to side, take deep breaths, nod yes, up and down. So my students had this as the little direction. So it's not content-based. I mean, I taught social studies. Doing high fives and nodding and balancing are not things that are in my social studies curriculum, but they were things that gave my kiddos an opportunity to let their brain re-energize.
Danielle?
Yes?
When you get a chance, could you
Sure.
show how to set the timer?
Oh, absolutely. Here, I will. Let me see if I can go and edit that right now. So all of our lesson activities, and I'm just going to my edit option. I'm not sure if you can see that all the way over here. All of the lesson activities have this display where you can do a lot of customizations, and the timer function is right down here. So I have it engaged. I can turn it off. You can see it disappears, but there's the timer. I can add in, say, 3 minutes and 15 seconds. And then there we go. The great thing with the timer is it doesn't begin until you click on the screen. So my students would need to touch, and then we can see the timer is clicking down. So this would be great too if you were using this activity in multiple zones in your classroom when we are able to return back to the school setting. You could open this in one zone and then open maybe a spinner or something with numbers in an opposite zone, and then spin it to decide, how many of something you're going to do during this allotted time. So I'm going to go back. I think this should take me back to my list. Let's go back again. So that was a really fun one that involved a lot of very active movement, incorporating a lot of that physical exercise. So it was something we tried to do regularly in my classroom. I don't believe in the idea of students sitting for an entire class period. I can't sit for that long. I can't expect middle schoolers or really any other kiddo in school to try and sit still for that long. So it was just a really good way to get up and get a little bit of extra exercise during the day. So another example that we have, this is a spinner, and it is a disco inspired one. I worked at a district that put on amazing musicals every spring, and we did, the last year that I was there, the musical was Mamma Mia. So we had a lot of ABBA music playing throughout the school, stuck in my head a lot. So it was kind of the inspiration for this. And students would spin the wheel, and then it would pull up the move that they had to do. For this one, the information includes a couple different options to play. So playing it in that one zone, as you can see we just did here, setting it up into 2 zones and doing like a little dance off. So having the class divide, spin the wheel, and then coming up with their best version of the move. This would be great too. You could probably throw in so many like Fortnite moves. I have no idea how Fortnite operates or like what the whole premise of it is, but I know that my middle school boys loved doing those dance moves. So I'm sure that would be something that you can incorporate too. And then the third option, setting it up into 4 zones, doing like a little choreographed dance party for a particular amount of time. So it's just a fun one to do. And then the last one, this one is actually built with a spinner to go with it. So this was one that I used probably the most often in my classroom. We had a spinner, same background. Students would spin it, it would reveal a number, and then another student would come up and select the card, and then they would both lead the class. So the one student who spun the wheel, the one student who selected the card would be the ones who would count how many of each activity or exercise we were doing. And then all of the class would follow along with it, and then a new pair of students would come up. So everyone kind of got their chance to come up, do a little movement around. So having these short brain breaks in my classroom, like I said, I never had them longer than 3 minutes. They were really, really short. And I definitely noticed in my students, even for my older kids, my 8th graders, having that opportunity to stop thinking about the content that we were learning and give their brains a chance to to kind of refresh. It made it so that when they did come back to work, they were able to really focus and then continue moving forward. And I didn't have to worry as much about them becoming unattentive or distracted or not engaged in what we were doing. So we had built into our schedule a chance for them to just, not think about the content and instead do something a little bit different, be it something a little bit physical. Also a lot that involved a little bit of socializing. So like the 4-wall touch, they had to go touch all 4 walls so they could walk around with one of their friends while they were doing that. We did a lot of like high-fiving and being able to kind of move around and talk to their classmates, build that community within our brain breaks as well. So I know that was a lot, especially a lot with neuroscience. So I'll give you a chance to have a little brain break. And then if you want to send any questions over to Jack, I would happily answer those. In the meantime, I will show you where you can find these examples in our community. So I'm going to the Explore page. Again, if you have any questions, just go ahead and put those into the chat and Jack will relay them to me. And I'm doing just a search for brain. So we can see some examples here. So we do have like the would you rather questions. So here's the card one I showed you, and that is the spinner that matches with it. We have our disco one. Go and just filter. There we go. So we can see kind of some of the other examples. So there they are in the community, and then some of our translations that we've done so that they're available in other languages in other countries.
So Danielle?
Yes.
There has been a couple of people that have written in saying, could you please walk them through how to create a brain break?
Sure.
So if you could do that. At the same time, I'm going to put a poll up, and normally only about 5 to 10% of you answer the poll. So I'm going to beg before I even do it, please go through and answer the poll because it's important feedback for us. So Danielle, go ahead and I'll
Sure.
the poll.
All right, so I'm going to, the 2 lesson activity types that I find the most beneficial for brain breaks. I really like cards and I really like spinner. Both of these lesson activity templates, you can put the data in one and then it would also appear on the other. So that's a really great, handy little compatibility between the 2. So there's that. I think in general, with any of the lesson activities that you're doing, when you do return back to the classroom and students are able to engage in that interactive panel, just that physical being up and moving and working on the lesson activities out of their chair is definitely going to give them that additional little mental break as well. In this case, I think we'll do a spinner. So I'm selecting the spinner lesson activity type. I'm going to just do a quick little title. And with our spinner, I'm just going to add in, whenever I create a spinner, I usually think of how many segments do I want. And I really like when my spinner has even numbers. I'm not sure why, it's just one of those. I like when things are symmetrical. So I usually just set up my spinner first, numbering it, so I know exactly how many pieces I want. And then I can decide if I want to do anything to change the background. I can pull in background images from, so maybe if I were doing like a yoga one or something with deep breathing, I could bring in images that I've maybe saved from my computer or I've done a search for. So we'll do an image search. I won't search yoga, but I know everyone's not familiar with that, but I'll search jumping jacks. I also advise that if you are having your students do brain breaks, I think it's really important that you participate as well. I think it sets a really good model for your kiddos. And I always like to challenge the kids. I'm like, if I can do it, you can do it. And gave them that incentive of like, okay, can Miss Macklin do more jumping jacks than me or not? All right, so there's my picture. So we can see that one's a little bit hard to see. So I'm going to try a different one. So again, I'm just doing a basic image search. If I were creating this kind of on my own outside of class, I probably would have found my images ahead of time and scaled them down to a smaller size. But for the sake of this, I'll just use that big one right now. I could also incorporate sound. So maybe I want to have like an athletic whistle or something that relates to it. I can add in that audio. Or I could record jumping jacks. And I have up to 15 seconds of audio. And then when my students spin the wheel, see if I can get it to land on that. They can hear the audio as well. So we have an image for that. I'm going to do text for the other boxes. We'll do toe touch. Side bend, deep breath. Think of what else did we do in our class. Place. And we'll do squat. I try to avoid any of the physical things that would require my students to be on the ground, just because I had about a little bit over 100 kids per day, so I know the floor would get really dirty and definitely didn't want them doing like sit-ups or push-ups or things that they would be on the floor having to do. We tried to stay kind of close to our seat. And a lot of these exercises I tried to consider too some of the mobility issues that maybe some of my students would have. So if there were things that they could do from their desk if they needed to, or from a seated position. And I always made sure that before we did them, we would model what it looked like. So if we spun our wheel and it got to jumping jacks, I would show, okay, this is how we do a jumping jack first, because I never wanted my students to do something physical that would, by chance hurt themselves if they didn't know what they were doing. But they were really good. We talked a lot too when we were doing these about, listen to your body, and it shouldn't hurt when you do a side bend, and don't do anything that's going to strain yourself while you're doing it. So I'm going to change this back to just a text. So we have just our text in each box. I could customize this so that with this particular spinner, I can select to have segments remove. I can also select to hide the contents of that. So we're going to update that preview. So the hiding makes it so they cannot see it until the spinner stops. So as it spins, it stops, it reveals what they would then do. And then now that piece has disappeared. And then we'll do the next one, and you can see those pieces are disappearing. So that's really good too if you want to eliminate students doing the same activity over and over again. I'm going to unselect that just so I can see what it looks like again. So, and then from here, I'm going to take that audio out before I keep accidentally hitting it. So from here, I could also customize more details about my font. So I can change the font type, the font size. Right now it's small so that it all fits. I can add different color, and we see right now it has the shadow. I can disable that, and then I can change my theme. So we have quite a few different background themes to choose from. Some of them also have kind of live animations at the beginning. Underwater is an example of that. So before this lesson activity would be played, it would have just a quick few second little intro of going, underwater. So it's just another fun kind of transition into the lesson activity itself. Or I could even bring in pictures from my own background. I could do an image search. So this would be great, especially during like different holidays. We could just make it specified, if we're getting close to, or we just have Memorial Day, I could search for something related to that as my background. I can also connect to my Google Drive, my OneDrive, or then pull up backgrounds from our content gallery. So these are already included in Snowflake and Snow.Live. Everyone has access to it. So we have a lot of different categories for background. I always go to basic. I really like the colors of these. And we can see just pulling that in. So we have just a new little background. So I have this lesson activity as a spinner. I could take the same information, and without having to add any new data, any new words, I can change the lesson activity type, and I could change that into a card lesson activity. So with cards, so you can see I didn't have to put in anything new. I could include over here a picture of the lesson activity, or of the, the exercise. And then for this, I can change the gameplay rules so that it's flipped. So then those cards are hidden until my students turn them over. And again, all of these customizations I can change as well. So I hope that helped explain a little bit of how to create. So I can go back again, change to a different type. So like I said, I started with Spinner. Spinner is compatible with cards, so I was able to add in that new information. I could even do a guess. Since these are all just words, I could do a guess. The students could take turns guessing the activity and then doing the particular exercise. Same with Scramble. They could do a search for those words in our Scramble box, and then find them, and then have to do that particular exercise. So it's something that just takes a moment to step away from the content, step away from the curriculum that you're teaching and the skills that you've been working on, and giving students and their brain a chance to refocus, to allow those networks to recover, and to let the brain re-energize. Are there any other questions at this time?
Don't have any other questions that have come in.
Okay.
So, and we also still have very low participation in the poll, so please run over to the poll and answer it. And I would like to thank you, Danielle, again for preparing everything. You did a great job, as always. And I know I look forward to even coming on and hearing what you've got going on. And someone wrote, as always, wonderful. So thank you. She does always do wonderfully. And
thank you.
We look forward to seeing all of you again next week. Have a great week.
Bye.
Bye.